Good morning. Thank you for being here, and for those of you that have joined us online, thank you. All across the state of Minnesota, we want to bring attention to the launch of the Click It or Ticket enforcement campaign, and also to discuss the importance of wearing seatbelts. My name is Bruce Gordon. I'm with the Department of Public Safety. You'll hear from several speakers today. We also want to help you understand what it's like to be inside a crash when you're not wearing a seatbelt. You'll notice the State Patrol simulator, the rollover simulator, and we'll take you inside a crash and see. You can see what that looks like and help you visualize the importance of wearing a seatbelt. Also, you'll notice behind me a vehicle that was involved in a recent crash. Unfortunately, the person that was in that vehicle, the driver, was wearing a seatbelt. You'll hear more about that in just a moment. We have two speakers today. You'll hear from Donna Berger. She is the Director of the Office of Traffic Safety, and Lieutenant Tiffany Nielsen of the Minnesota State Patrol. Donna?
Good morning. It's already been a deadly start in 2015 on Minnesota roads, and especially for those that have failed to buckle up. Preliminary numbers show that 30 people who chose not to buckle up have lost their lives in 2015, 10 in April alone. The Office of Traffic Safety is focused on saving lives on Minnesota roads. And last year, roughly half of our motor vehicle occupants who lost their lives were not buckled. We know seatbelts save lives. That's why it's so heartbreaking when many people don't make it home to their loved ones because they failed to take that few seconds to buckle their seatbelt. In the rural parts of the state, many motorists feel they're safer because they're away from city traffic. But in 2014, our preliminary numbers show that 86% of the unbelted deaths occurred in greater Minnesota. We all want our loved ones to come home at the end of the day. So don't be afraid to speak up and tell your friends and family to buckle up. As parents, we're role models and we're responsible to make sure our children are safe. When my children were younger, I never started that car, put it in drive until everyone is buckled up. And I'm proud to say that my children are now the same way with my sweet grandchildren. In the last 5 years, about 40% of children, the 22 children that lost their lives, that were 7 and under, were not properly restrained. And these are all preventable. So please, make a commitment to wear your seatbelt and speak up to occupants in your vehicle to have your friends and family wear their seatbelts too, because it saves lives. Minnesota is going to be participating in the National Click It or Ticket campaign starting May 18th through Memorial Day. And we know Memorial Day is the beginning of our summer season in Minnesota. It's a time for friends and family to get together, but unfortunately it's also the deadliest time on Minnesota roads, making it that much more important that everyone saves from these preventable deaths and buckles their seatbelt. So I'd like to ask Lieutenant Nielsen to now come to the podium.
Hi, my name is Lieutenant Tiffany Nielsen with the Minnesota State Patrol. Behind me, we have brought in a crash vehicle that was involved in a collision on May 3rd on Highway 94 at Broadway. This driver operating this vehicle behind me was impaired by alcohol. Fortunately, this driver had his seatbelt on. He crashed his vehicle into the wall, which you can see the front end damage, and then rolled the vehicle onto the side. He survived the crash with lacerations and a sore back. Now, one thing that we see with drivers who use alcohol and drive is oftentimes they don't put their seatbelt on. It's a pretty common pairing with alcohol use and no seatbelt use, which has the potential for fatal or serious injuries if they're involved in a crash. This driver, although he was arrested, was fortunate to walk away with minor injuries because he put his seatbelt on. We know that a third of drivers who are drinking that are killed in crashes are wearing seatbelts. That means 2/3 are not. Minnesota law states that all drivers and passengers are required to be properly restrained in a motor vehicle. If an officer observes a passenger or a driver not wearing a seatbelt, we can stop that driver and issue a citation to the driver or the passenger. The law also states that all children under the age of 8 need to be in a proper child restraint. Once they are 8 years old or 4'9", whatever comes first, then they can move into a regular seatbelt. On Monday, 300 agencies are going to be participating in the Click It or Ticket campaign, which will run until the end of May. So there's 300 agencies in the state of Minnesota that are going to be out looking for seatbelt violations. And we want drivers to make the decision, put their seatbelt on, make sure their children are properly restrained, so they're in compliance with the law, they're keeping themselves and their family safe, and then they won't meet an officer. If you're ejected from your vehicle, you can be tossed 60 to 100 feet away from the vehicle. That forward momentum is the law of physics applies to you. If you're traveling at 60 miles an hour in your vehicle and you're ejected, your body is going to be traveling at 60 miles an hour. And thinking about the forces that are going to act on your body, those injuries, if they're not fatal, are absolutely going to be life-changing injuries. You may not be able to work, you may be disabled for the rest of your life, and no person who's been involved in this type of crash will ever tell you they will tell you they wish they would have made a better choice on the front end, that now they're living with that consequences of that decision. In a crash, if you're restrained improperly, so if you just wear the seatbelt across your lap, which some drivers do, your upper torso can be moving around with a high velocity and force. And those types of crashes, drivers can hit their head on the windshield or the side of the vehicle and cause a traumatic brain injury. And again, those types of injuries are life-changing injuries. Secondly, you can be a danger to somebody else in your vehicle if you're not wearing your seatbelt. You can become a projectile object in your vehicle and injure another person that may be properly restrained in your vehicle. So what we're going to demonstrate to you today is those three scenarios. Number one, a driver who's properly restrained. Number two, where the occupants are improperly restrained. And the scenario of one person wearing a seatbelt, one person not wearing a seatbelt in their vehicle. Now behind me is the rollover simulator, where we utilize this rollover simulator at community events, at the state fair, at public safety open houses, as a way to visually demonstrate what can happen if you're involved in a rollover collision and you do or you do not have your seatbelt on. Now keep in mind that we cannot operate this at the velocity of a traveling vehicle. So what we can account for is the forward momentum that you would see in a rollover crash. So the first scenario we'll run, if you want to step up. So right now in this vehicle, we've got an adult driver who's properly restrained, and we also have a child dummy in the front seat wearing a seatbelt. So Dave will activate it here, and you can see as the vehicle starts to spin, that both the passengers and the driver are staying safely in the passenger compartment of the vehicle. And that's where they're safe. Vehicles are designed, as long as you stay in that compartment, you will have reduced risk of injury or death. We'll stop it here. So the next scenario we'll run, it will take the seatbelt off of both the occupants. So you can see what can happen very quickly if both the driver and a passenger do not have seatbelts on. We'll do the driver too. Yep. And oftentimes we're seeing these types of crashes in rural settings. Drivers in a rural setting feel more secure, don't worry as much about other vehicles, and a single vehicle rollover is what they need to be concerned about, and certainly going off the side of the road during inclement weather, driving too fast through a curve is a very likely type of crash. So here we'll run it with no seatbelts on the passenger and the driver. You can see very quickly they're tossed inside the vehicle. As the momentum picks up, we've got one ejected, and you can see how much force that body is being thrown inside the compartment. And one thing you could have noticed there is part of the body exited the vehicle. We would call that a partial ejection, and the force of that vehicle coming down on that person could very easily cause fatal injuries, even though the vehicle hasn't come to final rest. So now we'll run a scenario with an unbelted passenger and a belted passenger, so one of each. I'm going to step over so we can get it set up.
While Lieutenant Nielsen is doing that, I wanted to recognize both the Golden Valley Police Department and Hennepin County Sheriff's Office who have joined us here today. They're part of the hundreds of law enforcement agencies around Minnesota who will be enforcing the Click It or Ticket campaign May 18 through Memorial Day. We'll set up this next scenario, and you'll be able to see that both from that angle, and then we'll also make sure that you have some GoPro opportunities too.
So this scenario we've set, the driver is not wearing a seatbelt, but the child is. And that's a pretty common situation. We'll stop a vehicle, the kid is wearing a seatbelt, the driver is not wearing a seatbelt. You know, for some reason, either they forgot or didn't pay attention to do that. You can see immediately that that body is coming in contact with the other person in the vehicle, where the child with the seatbelt is staying right in that safe area of the vehicle. So again, although this simulates rolling the vehicle, what we can account for is that forward momentum, which is really where all those forces would throw the body much farther and have that rapid deceleration, which causes a lot of fatal injuries and serious injuries. Does anybody have any questions? Yes. So proper positioning of seatbelt is very important. For adults, the seatbelt's designed to be worn across our hips and over our clavicle. Sometimes drivers put them under their arms because it feels more comfortable. However, that's improper use of seatbelt, and the injury that can result in a front-end crash is compression on your rib cage. You can actually break ribs. When it's worn over your shoulder, you can't have that type of injury, and it keeps you seated in the seat. So the seatbelt should be worn over the shoulder, not under the arm. And we will stop drivers for improper use of seatbelt in that situation and explain why it's so important to wear it properly. For children, again, with the car seat restraint system, the recommendation is you should only be able to pinch this much material between your fingertips. That restraint should be worn properly across the nipple line and buckled between the legs. It's a harness style system. And the design of that is so that the spine stays in alignment and against the back of the seat if there is a collision involving an infant or small child. Now, a booster seat is for ages 4 to 8. That raises the child up so the seatbelt goes across the hip bones and not across the abdomen. If children are small and that abdomen is crossed with the belt, they actually can be seriously injured or even paralyzed because there's so much forward motion and most of their weight is from the waist up. So by putting that booster seat, it heightens the child up, it allows the belt to go across their hip bones, so it keeps them in a safer position in the event of a crash.